Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Ilana Levin, and this is an X-Men podcast. This is an X-Men podcast for people who have always related to the mutant metaphor, but also think it's probably not enough. While I have always loved the mutants, I have had the pleasure of having many reasons to talk about them a lot lately because of the new X-Men animated series X-Men 97, which I've covered for the past 2 episodes. And this one will be the final in the 3-part series of X-Men 97. We'll be covering the finale arc of the series. Full spoilers, of course. The original plan I had for X-Men 97 coverage was that I was going to be doing the episodes with my dear friend and frequent podcast collaborator, Stephen Attewell, but he passed in early April. Thankfully, we were able to record 1 episode, but since we've been without him, I've been bringing in special guests who aren't just friends of mine, but who are also friends of Stephen's as well. So to wrap up this series, I have my dear friend Ethan Gould joining me today. He's been on the podcast once before to talk about Steven Universe a number of years ago. And Ethan is back. He is a New York City-based artist and art director focused on alter egos, alternative anatomies, and alternate realities. He is currently working on The Sometimes Kingdom, a retro fantasy game out later this year with Stillfleet Studio, and a sculpture series about translucency and heads and puppets and stuff. Welcome back, Ethan.
Hi. Good to be back.
We were just talking before the audio was rolling about how important X-Men have been to you and were to you as a young person are to you today. Give our listeners a little sense of your history with both the animated series and with X-Men as a whole.
Oh, yeah. I feel like in a lot of ways I'm kind of the poster child for like the importance of additional media besides comic books. My first real introduction to it, outside of a few issues that my older sibling had and some friends had, was the cartoon show itself. So to me, the cartoon show was sort of my entry into it. And then a long time, it was sustained by arcade games and video games. And then I started buying the comic books for myself. And actually, the first comic books that I started purchasing for myself that I wasn't just bogarting off of friends or borrowing from my family was Operation Zero Tolerance, was the Bastian saga.
Wow.
Yeah. So the timing of this was really sort of fortuitous. I think a lot of the stuff that I wound up loving about structural adaptation when it comes to literature and different kinds of media, something that I wound up studying in undergrad and grad school, came from trying to puzzle out what the hell was happening in X-Men, starting with the cartoon show and then picking up like the black and white, trades, the really amazing compilations we used to have of the 70s run, so then passing that back and forth with my sibling and then sort of being like, okay, well, this is the baseline. And then I remember so you wind up putting stuff together very non-linearly and understanding that it changes when it moves from medium to medium. And that really sort of prepared me for like a lot of like postmodern literature and like Arthuriana and a lot of like literary history and like structural adaptation that I wound up like doing a lot of stuff with later on in my life. So in a lot of ways, this cartoon show sort of like was the making of me, but also, let's be fair. I was young when it came out and it was also kind of like the sexiest thing until like, I don't know, Melrose Place came out. So a lot of formative thoughts, a lot of formative like ideas. And also the X-Men are just generally cool, but I feel like the cartoon show was definitely my like entry point to it.
That's so crazy because, well, one, I want to respond to that saying, so what you're saying is it's the X-Men to be credited for the fact that you're now like all into Italo Calvino, right? I guess, is that accurate?
Sure. Let's go with that. I mean, it's, it's either that or like, I don't know, Michael Moorcock and Isaac Asimov. But yeah, I think it's cooler to say, let's go with the X-Men cartoon.
And then also saying it was super hot and sexy was interesting to me because I'm like the tiniest bit. I'm a few years older than you. And like, I feel like that just that alone is somehow what shifted. Like I certainly had a crush on characters, but like, I didn't have that same level of like, this was a sexual awakening show for me that I know is true for a lot of people who are a little younger, just a little younger than I was.
Well, it's interesting to me because it is like, you can't like solely put it on the characters or like the fact that it was the 90s and it was based on a different era of comic books. So it was like, boy, we were just talking about this before the show started. Boy, are those proportions, done up. But like on top of that, like the show was handled with this like really interesting balance of like vigor in terms of who the characters were and how they were able to talk and like how little shit they put up with. And on top of that, like, I think like even in terms of like the hotness of the characters or like the X-Men in general, but like this was a show that took itself really seriously. It was the gravitas of it. And it was like all of these theatrical actors doing such incredible voice work. I feel like to a large extent, like you wind up having crushes on like people's voices, and that is definitely where that started. I think this is the really show because they a lot of the actors like had like stage, experience. And so having that in the mix, like all of the line readings that they are doing for the original show and then brought to life again in the second running of it is like, they are taking everything 1,000% seriously. It is these, and it's like sometimes some of the lines that they say are when Beast quotes something as a middle schooler or whatever. That is the first time that I, have heard that thing ever. It's like,
right.
You wind up getting stuff second and third hand, which I find really interesting also. So these characters are not only like beautiful and like attractive and their voices are gorgeous, and they're also saying things with like gravity and they're quoting literature in small little doses and stuff like that. So it's like, oh my God, this is the whole package right here. This is everything.
And you feel like, and it really feels like this show, as I've been doing more of a rewatch of the original series, this show really is picking up on so many of those things that were already there. I mean, I think the quality of the art and the quality of the animation right now is like clearly leagues beyond what was budgeted for back in those days. But the interest in the performances, it's all so many pieces from before are maintained till now. So many voices out of the past and characterizations. Like I keep coming back to like, they keep playing Cable's theme when Cable comes on. It's the same fucking theme from the 90s. They remembered it. And like the Western music for when Bishop shows up on, you're like, wow. It's like not Western. Yeah. It's like what you'd show in like a cowboy
it's that weird
movie.
electric harmonica sound. Like
it's amazing. That's like Bishop's theme. It's a cool thing to give him.
The original show had such an intense love for the kinds of audio they were doing. It was like, besides the performances, you're totally right. Some of the musical cues and sound effects, like coupled with the visual effects that they were trying to do, like have haunted me to this very day.
Wow. I actually almost want to do a second episode with you just talking about the original series. And maybe we should do that, actually. Let's do that later. I'm like, the more I'm into it, the more I'm like, I think there's space for this on the agenda.
Yay!
So that'll happen. We'll come back and do that later. But with this season, I will say to our listeners, I've gotten a lot of questions sent in. We definitely had questions about art in this animation in this for obvious reasons because of our guest, as well as, this is our time to talk about the finale. And if there's one thing that people want to talk about in the finale, well, there's two things that people want to talk about in the finale. One of them is the Sentinels and the significance and the politics and redemption and not redemption and falling into a web of a right-wing forum online and turning herself into a monster robot. And then the other thing, which is where I think we'll start, as it is what we did with the last episode, is we have to talk about Magneto and Xavier because that was intense. Drawing on the metaphors that Rogue had even begun when talking about her relationship with Magneto and like why she split with him. She was like, he had raging waters. And then here we are in Magneto and Xavier's mind, shared mind palace. And there's waters raging and coming in. And we have such an extreme crisis and catharsis, also like dancing through the air with each other, and being up in each other's faces moments with our favorite star-crossed lovers, I suppose. That this felt like the episode to, we've been dancing around it through part 1 and part 2 of this series. And like part 3 is where the rubber hits the road. We're going to talk about Magneto and Charles. How did you feel about opening the last episode of the series on Magneto and Charles's meet cute?
Fantastic. It landed very well in this household. It it's in comic books, you wind up having as much subtext, especially in that era. I feel like you're the ones who sort of like originally pointed this out to me, and like pointed me in the direction of like interviews from the actual creators of those comic books where they were getting away with as much as they were able to. And then having a show, very wisely like push that in a direction that is a little bit more overt, still skirting it, but honestly, like that longing works a lot better with those two characters because they really love each other and they really hate each other's guts, and it works really well. Yeah, no, I think it was an excellent way to go. I think that like the operatic drama between the two of them really sort of shined through, and like their passionate like moment of like, well, it wasn't even a moment. Like how long do they like stare into each other's eyes in mind space for? Like a couple of 100 milliseconds, or like 6 hours, several days, 30 years? It's hard to say in the mind palace that's actively flooding, gushing with raging waters, torrenting.
Everything is just incredibly wet right now.
Everything's just so soggy, you guys.
I am going to detour to something that I've been obsessing over, which is, of course, the fact that not only did this final episode open with their meet cute, that also has a needle drop to a song by the Byrds. And as Sarah alluded to when we were covering the mid-season, when Sarah was on earlier, what Sarah alluded to, that took me a second there, because in this scene, they are so clearly supposed to be in immediate post-war Germany. Or, I mean, we know that they say later, like when we met in Germany, XYZ, so they were supposed to be meeting in Germany. And here we are with the folk rock song from 1965. And my brain is just like, is this one of those times where the people who are making something know so little about history that they don't understand that like 65 is many years after the end of World War II, kind of like all those people who like were talking about Mad Men, like saying it was 50s. It's like, it's not 50s, it's pre-hippie 60s. Anyway, but then I'm like, no, Ilana, I have a no prize for this, which gives credit to the show. And the no prize is that the fact that this scene we're seeing, it isn't happening live. It's a flashback. It's a flashback being called together in their minds. And why is Magneto inadvertently soundtracking this memory of his life with a song by the Byrds from 65? Clearly the answer is because Charles and Eric were still together all the way through the mid 60s. And they were both really big Byrds fans. And this is just a record. They listened to it together a lot. And that is my no prize explanation.
It sounds airtight, rock solid to me.
Thank you.
No further questions. Clearly that's the obvious answer. Yeah.
Folks should definitely listen, by the way, to the Byrds album, Turn, 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 or actually literally anything by the Byrds, BYRDS. They're one of the best bands ever. But in deference to Sarah's complaint, it was so surprising and confusing. I was so busy squealing over how excited I was to hear the Byrds on an animated TV show about the X-Men that I did, in fact, go and rewind the scene like 4 times in order to actually understand what people were saying. I don't know if you at all got thrown by like, what is the time? What is the place of this? But it just felt like there were so many layers happening, and having them meet in a bar and essentially play like, are you queer? Am I queer? Are we both queer? Like they're literally trying to clock each other to see if they're a safe person. Like,
what if I was a mutant? Is literally, I believe, the line in it. And
it's like, literally, there's no other reason. Because look, in the comics, they meet in a hospital working directly with patients. So if the series did not want us to read queer subtext into their meeting, they would not have set this in a bar. Period.
Right. There are many different places where one can meet.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me wonders also is because I believe there's the bar scene in the movies to draw on from, but at the same time, like they don't really draw from that material at all, like for the duration of the show. So I kind of feel like that one could be moved off the board. It's sort of an intense meeting space, and it like the way that it is, like the cinematography, or I guess just the camera position, virtual camera for the cartoon show, is placed with that sort of like below chin upwards angles to like add this extra drama, like when they're positioning back and forth between them. It is supposed to read as intense banter. It's not taking in the scene. It's not like the fact that they are where they are is less important than the fact that they are in a bar cozying up to each other, like at the bar, having an intense conversation with each other, a meaningful one, which I feel like can have a variety of readings to it. But let's be honest here, which is the better reading?
Yes, the gayer one is the better reading. But the real jaw-dropping moment for me after I got over the birds was Magneto saying, like, basically being like, they're going to start building camps. It's so powerful to have him come and say that and basically be like, look, this is my worst fear, is that the thing that I just endured, because he himself was a Holocaust survivor, is that it will now be brought back to me, for you as well. And you have Professor X is just so optimistic and sunny and so eager to connect. And you're just like, oh, everybody's heart's just going to be broken. Like Magneto is showing up with his heart broken and traumatized, and Charles is just begging to fall the same, The
same path. Yeah, in terms of like the inevitable heartbreak between these two characters, with one trying to be optimistic and the other one coming from a place of how they view realism. And to be fair, it is realism, but like seeing both of the idea of like, is Magneto right? Is Magneto wrong? Is Magneto right? Is Magneto wrong? Like even the fact that they are entertaining it in this cartoon show is, I gotta say, I feel like it was a pretty baller move. Like I was deeply impressed by the level of maturity that like the dialogue in this show brought to some pretty bananas ideas. And like, drawing on like different sources, the comic books, like the previous cartoon shows, like other media for it, like stitching together like very, very coherent, not just moral quandaries and through lines and action sequences. And like the chain of dialogue is crystal clear and like where their emotions are at, but then also like taking interesting political stances and picking them up and analyzing them and having characters strongly disagree about them.
Yeah.
It is. I feel like the show probably didn't want to be as relevant as it wound up being this year.
Right.
And it probably wound up being relevant in ways that it like didn't initially anticipate being. I think part of the reason that the show reads is so cogent, in a lot of ways, like even more cogent than the original run of the show. I think that can definitely be.
I think for sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think that one of the reasons that it is so cogent is it is clearly centering characters first. It is about the like literally with the meet cute, literally with the bar and the flooding. Like this is a world that values character interiority, like to the point where it is like a literal location. And the show did that in the past in its comic books, and that's the amazing part about the psi plane and having telepathic characters is that you can really literally do that, but even past the literalization of a location.
Yeah.
It is centering their emotions and they're wrangling with philosophies and their place in society and what they're willing to do or sacrifice. But it is always about their individual struggles and their struggles with each other. It isn't just like plot, bang, bang, boom, boom. And I feel like the finale did wind up getting a little bit overstuffed. But at the same time, like watching it with my spouse, who is not a comic book fan, who like his only experience has been with the X-Men movies, being perfectly able to follow everything that was happening in this incredibly complex, convoluted, like sort of setup, like really speaks to, I think, the fact that they centered the characters and their struggles and then sort of, kind of like subjected all of the action and all of the like future meaning making in the show to that. So yeah, I think that's really great.
I mean, and the dialogue even is about driving it back to their interpersonal relationships, like that exchange between Storm and Jean, who, like, again, I don't know, man, they have vibes. With make them mind your weather and make them weather your mind. They then go believe not in a dream or our gifts, but in each other. Like it's very focused on people's meaning and significance to each other. And especially through this finale where we have so much of a look at different kinds of families that people have created for themselves. Mm-hmm. It feels almost like a cliche to talk about this topic. Like I'm almost like, oh my God, do we have to? Because it feels like every single fucking piece of media is about that. But we have Jubilee helping Roberto come out to his family and then separate himself from his family because they literally fucking hand him over to the brown.
Yeah, they're like, well, here you go.
To protect their family fortune.
Right, which is, that's what's really important. I think we can all agree.
The shareholders
cost of family fortune. Children come and go, but that board, that's forever.
But I liked the show's decision to have their parents be superficially supportive, but then really when the rubber hits the road, their priority is not their kid, because I think that's a very cosmopolitan and shitty way that a lot of people are. I mean, having the friends of the family who want to do the fundraiser to support Genosha, but the second they see an actual mutant, they freak out, right? It's completely performative.
And the fact that his butler winds up being a Sentinel Prime, that is sort of that means that if the whole and she says the family, we knew it was not our place to say, they let him come out in his own time. But that also means that probably the butler knew. So there's the butler going on to chat forums, seething and then doing a fire and forget cybernetization. That whole situation is just no good, top to bottom.
Yeah. I mean, the entire relationship between Jubilee and Roberto is so a queer coming out story. It's a little bit I do hope that they let one or both of those characters, both of whom in the comics have tons of bisexual subtext, be queer on this show. We shall see, because they're doing the metaphor very heavily.
Right. This is always the quintuple duty that mutancy has to pull to be a pluripotent metaphor. It winds up, it has to both be a representation of politics and ethnicity, personal identity, sexuality, gender. And it's it winds up being very sweaty. Sometimes I do really think that the mutant metaphor is not up to the task of all the things that it was set out to represent. Because in some ways it becomes a very sort of oblique metaphor, and sometimes it becomes a very overt one. Sometimes I think the real power isn't exactly like you're saying. It can, it is about their family, and it's about found family, which are very important to queer life and life in general. But then at the same time, it has to then do all of these other things. So it's and at the end of the day, you're just sort of oh, come on, just let them find somebody cool. Because it's in real life, we're just throw us a bone, come on. And speaking of which, I guess that's also the Morph situation. I guess that's a little bit more overt than definitely what I was expecting.
Is more overt than what the actor was expecting. The actor G.P. Carlock, who plays Morph really wonderfully in the show, who is themselves is queer and I believe non-binary. They didn't know that character was going to be canonically regarded as non-binary in the show, in interviews. And they also felt their relationship with Wolverine their feelings towards Wolverine would be remaining completely subtextual, which is not, it's textual. That final scene, super heartbreaking. Sarah and I were a little bit earlier, were lamenting how the character gets a little bit shoved into the funny, cheeky gay, but also the tragic gay. Those are the two characterizations, sad, lonely, left alone. But they do have a moment where they tell Logan something that feels very in line from, as I've been watching the animated show, feels like it's kind of in there from the start, also mutually, which is, that Morph has feelings for Logan. And it's Logan has obviously made a decision that he is not going to continue dramatically crying Jean every 30 seconds like he did in the earlier series. I'm so glad he's not doing that, but he definitely still has his feelings. And I'd like to think that he knows that that's Morph who says that to him and not Jean.
Yeah, one hopes. He's very old. I feel like he knows some things and maybe those things stick. It's a kind of character where, I think depending on the medium and depending on the year or the issue or the episode or the season, it could be some real widely varying how much does this character know about themselves and how much are we going to show that they know something about themselves? But like,
Mm-hmm.
to your point, I feel like this is a bit more of a grown up version of him. There's the really messy scene with him and Jean, and she is just like at a body of water. By the way, I also really, really adore fictional Westchester with its cliffs and its massive lakes and its bodies of water.
Oh, I should have mentioned this to our listeners. You're from the X-Mansion. You are from Westchester.
I am from, yeah. Growing up, I used to, I was like, oh boy, I hope it's maybe it's right around Forgetting Manor, but it's like, let's be honest here, it's probably in Scarsdale. It's fine.
Well, I mean, I didn't even think about to mention this to Sarah. Sarah and I both went to college in Westchester at Sarah Lawrence College, which we absolutely all joked was like actually a Professor Xavier School for Gifted and Talented Children because of.
Well, you start looking at it and you're like,
true.
oh, like which cities like how are more bucolic? Which ones have got more like, it's a very woodsy county as things go. If you were trying to hide a jet, it's probably a really good place. It's a true city, USA. But I do love the idea of like, oh yeah, and then like overlooking the bluff into this canyon, which we have.
I know, like what canyon? What?
I really love a place that can be all things like as needed for the plot. Like, where's Gotham City? Doesn't matter. Like, it's wherever it needs to be for the climate of whatever we're doing. Is it Chicago? Is it Baltimore? Is it Cincinnati? Is it New York at nighttime? Stop asking questions. It's like, does Westchester have cliffs? Quiet. It definitely
this
has
one
mansions.
does.
Yeah, it's got mansions, and some of those mansions
Mm-hmm.
probably have like underground hangars. But yeah, anyway.
For other reasons.
for other unspecified reasons.
But back to Magneto and Charles being very, very queer with each other.
Right. What's really important here.
How do you feel like there was catharsis between them at all in this, or are we going to be stuck in turmoil until the show, as the show continues to not actually let anybody say what it needs to be said?
Oh God, I don't know. I would like to think that there's some catharsis happening. How many times can he roll up in a pair of like, purple opera gloves and a giant M and be like, he loved only me. It's my mansion now.
Oh God, the poor boys. It's, and the thing is like, I think that there's a lot of media now that would have you, well, I feel like it's the polarity around Charles and Xavier as philosophical poles has shifted so greatly in the way that they're discussed to the point where the viewers are all coming at it saying Magneto is right, or at minimum, Magneto had some valid points. Now, Magneto had some valid points is literally a non-negotiable fact. That's like not even like that's, if you don't believe that, I don't know, you're just wrong. But
then when you have like the show, and the cartoon version of Beast is very different from the arc of that character in the comic books. But that aside, like this, honestly, this is my favorite Beast, like this sort of era of him. With him walking around Genosha, like giving interviews, and like when he starts espousing, like he's like, this is a sick joke. Obviously, Magneto knew what he was talking about to a certain extent. Like, then you're like, okay, well, if the self-certified voice of reason on this cartoon show is the one who's starting to say that, like the cartoon show has at that point then taken a stance and saying that yes, he had some very valid points. There aren't like, oh, he said a thing and then like, no, you can't believe it because blah blah blah. It is a bit of a shocker when Rogue takes from the comic books like the Colossus like perspective, and it's like, nah, I'm gonna go with him now.
I thought that was so good though. It was very good. It was her and Roberto deflirting. The fact that it was Rogue deflirting. The fact that
deflirting
is
great. She definitely deflirted. Yeah,
she did. The fact that Rogue and Roberto defected to Magneto, I thought was exactly the right choice based on what had happened to both of them.
Yeah.
With Roberto's family and with her trauma and her anger, and her relationship with Magneto. I'm like, yeah, that's who would leave to go with him. And that Wolverine would be the person who was like most ready to fucking stab Magneto also felt real.
Right. He was the one playing for keeps. And at the same time though, like you do have the same sort of quandary whenever a character in a piece of media like this, like has like a hard stance about like real facts on the ground. They also have to, he's like, and then I'm going to let the earth die. So it's like, well, he has a very point, but we have to stop him because he's going to kill the earth.
Yeah.
If he had
and say it in a eugenicsy way, right?
And say it in a eugenicsy way. And unfortunately now also that scans more than it should. it is sort of like, it isn't just like he's a scene chewing villain. Like it is like, crap, this show is like, I think, scoring some political points that it, again, didn't necessarily anticipate it would be making in this particular run at this particular moment in time about current events. So, but at the same time, you do wind up having a situation where a character must be stopped because everybody will die, when oftentimes the more politically or like story interesting tack would be like holding it off and being like, well, now factional lines have developed between these two points. Both of the points have a lot of problems with them. One of them is clearly righter than the other, but one of them is like more realistic than the other. And that's a really interesting place. And I feel like the comic books did that more than, say, like a cartoon show can do in like a one season arc
time. But I just think it's striking how the polarity has changed in what the viewer's assumed position is now.
Absolutely.
And what do you think about Valerie Cooper, who we presume is Valerie Cooper and not Mystique, saying that what scared her most was realizing that Magneto was right? That was really powerful. I loved her releasing Magneto. That was so fucking amazing. I mean, just the reaction of the clip where you see her looking at his tattoo of this number from being in, I believe, Auschwitz.
She's a real wild card. Yeah, she's a real wild card in the show. She vacillates back and forth and back and forth. Like, I'm like, oh, so you're part of Operation Zero Tolerance now? Okay, well, that's a bit of a heel turn. Oh, you're gonna free him. All right, cool. You're back on the good side again. Dear me, how confusing.
I mean, one of the things that I would absolutely have been talking about with Steven, if he were with us, would be like the whole thing with Captain America and Black Panther, the series. I think Cap is always going to be right in Cap's stories and will frequently not be in an X-Men story because he can't be for structural reasons.
Right. You always wind up having that different take on the character. Is like, well, I'm going to be the Huckleberry for this one because somebody's got to take the like authoritarian position. Not even authoritarian position.
It's not authoritarian. The
official voice of authority.
I mean, and like he's clearly, and that's the thing that's frustrating for Rogue is that he's like, no, you are right, but I can't go along with this. Because he has to play it by the books. The catharsis of her throwing his shield so far away, he had to get like Tony to go and like get a giant magnet to find it.
It's like, you forgot your shield. Rogue had some really amazing. Like moments, like feats of strength. Her rampage. She went on a proper, certified, justified rampage.
What did you think about her killing Trask? Because what threw me is that, like, I could not believe that Trask was remorseful in the slightest, and I do think the show wants us to believe that he was. It does not make any sense to me.
I feel like, that's the difference. Like, Charles Xavier was the kind of person who would have forgiven a character like that and taught an important lesson. But Charles Xavier was off with his bird wife. So it's sort of like, without that heavily moralizing sort of like super ego, like bearing down, I don't know. I feel like it's supposed to, that is one of those moments in the show where she did a bad thing because she killed a person. At the same time, that person helped commit a genocide, like instantly. Yeah,
literally.
So it is like,
well, and they literally address it with the. I thought you were one of the good ones. Hold on, I want to get the quote here. I thought you were one of the good ones, and she says, "You killed that kind sugar. Now you get me." Like I'm like that. The show put it in text, not just subtext. That is why she is saying this. That is where it comes from.
Yeah, she's willing to do a bit of a heel turn. Like she has lost she's lost both of her lovers and a society that she was going to be a ruler of, or at the very least a leader of. And with all of that together, it's rampage time. It just is.
But I like that. Like, I mean, I just don't even know why they would have Trask be remorseful. That's just one narrative. Of course, I don't understand the purpose of having Trask be remorseful. Having Valerie Cooper change where she's coming down on it does make sense to me. But I just don't know where Trask, who like literally made the Sentinels, would suddenly feel bad about that.
I think Trask's, and again, this is all very fuzzy for me, to my recollection, the way that it's set up in the show is that Trask was always hell-bent on stopping the mutants and containing them. I don't think extermination was ever his goal. Like, I think he was more interested in Bishop's future, which is still horrific, but it is more about containment and encampment and not outright extermination.
I guess that just seems completely interchangeable to me. I mean, right?
They are interchangeable.
And that's how it functions. But then meanwhile, let's talk about the thing that Jean says as the Phoenix that I've been really spinning in my mind. When Jean emerges as the Phoenix, as she's wont to do, she says, the Prime Sentinels didn't choose to be slaves to hate. And I was like frustrated about that because I was like, well, no, they did. They literally did. They like went in a chat room and said, I hate mutants. I want you to help me fight back. But I also was like, but Jean doesn't know that. Like Jean has no idea where they came from. She doesn't have any of that information. And so I don't blame her for not understanding that because she doesn't have the information that we have as a viewer, you know?
Right.
I mean, and you could say like, did all of the people who got sentinelized like understand the fully implications of what they were doing? It's
no,
like,
I mean there is the line in the Sentinel flesh factory, what have you?
Yeah,
where
the body shop, but not that body shop.
The other
not
one,
Spiral's body shop. The other one.
Comics. There is the line about did they know what they were getting into? He's like, I left some of the technical details out. I feel like it's heavily implying that they did not know what they were getting into, that maybe like it was more about like, they're gonna, take a stand. We're going to help you stand. We're going to help protect yourself. This is a very generous reading of it. It is more about,
oh yeah, no, totally. But it's still just like, no, Jean, like these are terrible people. I would probably prefer them not die because I feel like most people shouldn't, but they're still terrible people.
They're terrible people, but it is like, said time and again that it's like people are terrified of mutants because they're dangerous. And then Magneto turns off like the Earth's, magnetic
not helping. I love you,
not
my dear,
super
not
duper not helping. So like they're, all of these instances of like mutants being like dangerous. And again, I feel like that's where some of them, like it makes it, sometimes it's more interesting as a literal construct where like as a queer metaphor, it really lands and it really hits home. And it's like a differented metaphor. It really lands. But then also the fact that like they have like time and energy powers. They can rewrite like stuff at the quantum level. They can do dimensional portal. Like those are actually genuinely terrifying things. So it is sort of like, it's not that people are justified in their hate. Yeah. It sort of is like on some way and some levels, it really does push it to the end result. It's like, how willing are we to like support tolerance when something like that happens, when like people become truly different? So it's like really trying to push the metaphor to the extreme of it, which has its pluses and its minuses. It's like, the plus is that it's a really interesting construct. You get to see all these cool powers, and you also get to play the what if game, which is what the best speculative fiction does. But like, and then the negative part of it is that like, sadly, gay people do not have super energy powers. So it's sort of like they're all the dangers that people fear from the queer community, from different ethnic communities are all completely phantoms. They are just made up in their head. They are bizarre things used to manipulate people.
I love that, like, Bastian is saying, like, yeah, if a mutant hits on a sentinel at the bar, the sentinel will attack them. So they're like, oh, you've literally built, like, a hate crime machines.
Yeah.
Like, you've literally guaranteeing that people will be killed in this situation.
Yeah, that's
just completely parallel, like, real life that actually happens to people.
And it's very like, and he's just like, I'm putting this into overdrive because people are too goddamn good. He's tried everything. He's tried turning them into cyborgs, hate machines, and they're still too good. So he's like, screw it.
Bastian, the line, humanity would rather die than have kids like us, was interesting because it is the first time that I think Bastian recognizes himself as being part of mutants. Like, yeah, he's a robot, really, but like point. In a meaningful way, he's also a mutant in like a literal, in the way that Spider-Man is a mutant. Like he is a person who is mutated, right?
Yeah.
And like, because it was so hard. It's like, you like, Jean is like, they're having more of us every day. Cause that's the thing. Like, I'm always like, this is insane. Mutants are just people. Like, why is this an assumed that why would you have problems with people? These are just other people. These are continuation of people. This is good news potentially for people. And and, they're having more children like us all the time. And you're like, yeah, Jean, and just Bastian just crushing it all down afterwards. What do you think about and then Beast crushing him, which was just one of the best Beast moments. Sarah was, the world's biggest Beast fan, was feeling very edified. But what did you think about the team taking a pause and a beat to give Bastian the opportunity to make a different choice?
I think that was super duper interesting. I think part of the reason is like Charles Xavier was Charles back at the room at that point? Was he there?
No, he was there, but he was having mind palace feelings with Magneto.
Right, but I mean, like, even his presence means it's like, oh,
his presence in the room.
Crap,
yes.
We have to put our big boy pants on now. That sucks. I think that it is. Besides that, though, I think that it was super interesting because I think they understand the idea of like, they tried to ally with Magneto up until he did the thing multiple times, and they still are trying to do it. And even after all of that, Magneto, I think, as he's like floating up toward the Aurora Borealis that his giant asteroid is creating over Westchester sky, like he's like, well, the door's always open. You change your mind, come be cool with me, you guys. I feel like they are trying to be like, this person has had like a unique and horrific experience. They have been manipulated by a machine consciousness from the future, hell-bent on destroying us. Like, I think they're sort of like, nobody has an experience like that. That's totally unique. Shouldn't we at least give him the chance? Like,
yeah.
It just like as a unique entity in a unique form of consciousness who kind of took all of his programming to like the next level. But I think it was like, I think it was Storm who said like, you can't begrudge people being born. We are all born with our programming, as sort of like, yeah, you were programmed to destroy us, but that doesn't mean that you have to be programmed to destroy us. That's a real. Yeah. Is it true? I don't know. They were trying to. I think they were partly like testing a hypothesis. Like, do you have free will, and are you willing to do something about it?
What did you think of the character design for Bastian? Something you told me right before we got on. You blew my mind that the Bastian thing was the first X-Men comics that you bought yourself. Yeah. Did you see it coming? Did you predict that he was going to be the bad guy?
They got me because I saw OZT, and it has been so long since I've thought about that character. I was like, Operation Zero Tolerance. They got me. So it felt like a nice moment of like, I got a little bit of like nostalgia with a horrific seed chewing villain. It is interesting because like that run of comics was like when I started reading comics, and then shortly afterwards is also when I stopped reading comics because it wasn't a great era. Not super awesome.
It was not.
But
not for mainstream comics, at least.
Not for mainstream comics. I will say that it had some of the most interesting and cool character choices. Like coming after Generation X, then you wind up having, you've got Husk and Chamber and Marrow and all of these like really interesting visual characters. It was before like, if Scuttlebutt is to be believed, before the edict came down from on high about like no more interesting, ugly looking mutants or whatever. Yeah. So you wind up having this explosion of mutants who like are living like skeleton goo, and mutants who are, or, I don't know. I remember this one from the 2000s where it's like Wolverine is just like blowing off steam, and he's like at a bar fighting for money, and it shows an increasingly bizarre series of mutants that he's finding, and one of them is just like basically like a pile of like leaves and snot, and it's like, yep, this is just a normal member of the mutant community underground.
God, I love that. Right,
yeah.
Like support the mutant snot community.
There was a long period of time where that didn't happen because I think they brought the number of mutants down to like several thousand or 100 or whatever for.
And then and also the early mutants from were mostly the hot ones. So
right, and I feel like that's something that is brought up in a way that is like always super. It's like a little bit. Am I using this term right? Is it a lampshade where it's like, yep, we're only drawing supermodels, but like other mutants are really resentful of the fact that the hot ones get to live in the mansion. But then you've got like characters like Herman Glob, who's one of my personal favorites.
Blob Herman, God bless him.
Glob Herman being brought back has just brought me so much joy. Just what a treat. Like it's the same sort of thing where it's like he was originally just put in the mutant special class, which is a little loaded, but I get it. And now it's
like, on purpose. Yeah,
it's on purpose. It's done with intent and well. And then now in contemporary mutant society, he's just like a guy. And I think that's rad. But like anyway, back like my original, like I've always loved the Sentinels because it's like I started reading some of my sister's comics and friends like brought in. I remember the Infinity Saga. Like friends would just bring it in, and like I glanced at it. I'm like, oh boy, this is really dark. This is really interesting. It's not my cup of tea, but I really like the art in it a lot, and it seems super intense. And then and so it's sort of like scattershot back and forth. And I like read the black and white trade compilations of the 70s stuff. I remember reading like a bit of Asteroid M and the Magneto scene, pulling out Wolverine's like adamantium like at summer camp. And so it's like you sort of dip in every couple of years. I wasn't like, pulling trades. It wasn't my reading hobby. But then like it really was when Operation Zero Tolerance came around, where like I started committing after Age of Apocalypse, and like Age of Apocalypse was cool. It suckered me in. And then I kept reading for a while after that, through Operation Zero Tolerance. And then I sort of petered out again because it started getting bad and weird. But like looking back on it, bad and weird in an interesting way.
But the art got really heinous. So what did you think about
it got different.
We have different opinions about this.
We do.
We've
Let's
talked about this for a long time.
That's an entire separate. That is a totally separate episode about aesthetics.
Yes.
Anywho.
And also one where I kind of think the fact that I'm just a little bit older than you somehow is incredibly portentous in how we've defined these things.
That's
right?
super interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
I really think so. I'm just I'm just a little too Bronze Age, but I'm just a little too Bronze Age, but. So what did you think of the design for Bastian and
friggin' loved
Prime
it.
Sentinels?
I thought it brought a lot of things together that I like, different shades of fuchsia and purple, mostly machine consciousnesses. I appreciated that some of the really jaunty line work that they did, like whenever he was summoning like a cage of wires or like stuff, like they were pulling from the angles utilized when they were doing that kind of stuff in comic books. Like they were making maximum use of like, this is a cartoon. We've got to make this jaunty in an energetic way. The comic books already have done the work on that. Let's pull that and figure out what it is to animate it. And then they did it, and it looked really good. I really love it. And it's sort of also like, I love Theo James, like his depiction of this. I greatly enjoyed his work on Castlevania, but that his character, the Forge Master, Isaac, was like, or not Isaac, the other one.
He wasn't Isaac? He was Hector?
Hector. He was Hector. The Forge Master Hector. He's a muted and subdued person who has lived a solitary life and is also willing to exterminate human beings. But because of completely different magical, mystical reasons, family trauma. Actually, they're very similar reasons. He's just not very good at it. But coming in with Bastian and just like the gravel that he's able to bring to his voice and the enjoyment at like taking all the scenery into his like jaw and just chewing it up. The shaving sequence with Magneto just totally thrown in there as just like, this isn't even subtext anymore. He is definitely sexually aroused doing this. The whole scene is so weird and so great.
I saw that scene and I just was like, this is so insanely referencing both Scorsese and Tarantino.
100%.
Like the way the needle drop is done, and then the choice of it, Tarantino gets this from Scorsese, so I don't want to just say it's Tarantino. And I don't want people to think that I'm just saying this because of the use of Stuck in the Middle with You and Reservoir Dogs. Like, it's deeper than that. The thing that they do in their movies. Not just razors, I thought the choice of the Purple People Eater song, which is a theme that Bastian uses, and his sort of magenta being just far enough away from purple for me to not quite have it connect in my head as a dogmatic person who like reads the color labels on every single paint tube. I didn't quite go too far.
He is a Purple People Eater.
He is, even though he's technically speaking a magenta purple people eater. But so the song is a novelty song from the late 50s, and it's all about fear of the aliens. It's all but like a light and like snappy fear of the other song. And it's like, there was a big change that happened in pop culture and when aliens were always seen as threatening, menacing, had to be stopped, to a switch where they became like, oh, the aliens are going to come and they're going to save us, or oh, the aliens are good, or oh, the aliens look kind of like a weird testicle with giant eyes and he's cute and we're going to ride on a bicycle with him. That's obviously E.T. that I'm speaking of. In that period, it's like the threatening. I mean, that's what E.T. looks like. The threatening.
It's a Cold War metaphor, turning all your communists and stuff like that. It's
So yeah, exactly. And so it's sort of like, I liked them bringing it back to exactly the Cold War paranoia, the fear of the other and the fear of the difference, and the really light party song choice, just like make it cinematic. But yeah, also like there's no reason to like, you don't need to shave Magneto's face in order to put a gag over his mouth. He's not growing hair that fast. Like, I know that he's Jewish, but he's not growing hair that rapidly. Like, you can keep him, like, I can make this joke. These are my people.
It's fine. No, I'm laughing at familiarity with how rapidly my beard goes. Anyway, yeah, no, it is a delightful scene because it puts it squarely in camp, and it's like this is a character who, despite being more menacing, more gravelly, and like more of a plan together, out camps Mr. Sinister in the same scenes that they're in.
Right.
That takes work. Like Sinister is actually playing like the straight man in a couple of their scenes together, which is fantastic. You've got two
never
scene
before,
tours together.
Never again.
never to be seen before, never to be achieved again. So like I feel like the pairing of them together for this sort of like idea was superb. You know, it's like knitting together like several decades worth of different ideas into a coherent plot line. And it's like Mr. Sinister is just so freaking bizarre. You know, he's got to be in there, and then he's also then out camped by a magenta robot. Perfect, flawless.
Any thoughts about this character's street clothes through the series? I'll tell you, I was a teenager in 1997 and therefore very cognizant of what people were wearing. And the vast majority of fashion choices, they leaned a little bit early 97. Like at no point are you feeling like Nirvana has already happened and has
right.
Been
this is the late 90s that the early 90s like is still, because I believe that some of the comics they're pulling from are from the early 90s, and like the cartoon show is like scaled forward. So it is interesting because they have to call it X-Men 97 but then you get into the weird time dilation of comics and like episodic television, where it is like those outfits appear in the comic itself. Like they are drawing literal outfits that they wore back from the early 90s when neon was still awesome. I mean, neon is still awesome, but like back then it was like awesome.
Yeah, there was definitely a moment in the late 90s where you could not have fucking paid. Well, if you were a raver, you would wear neon. But okay, I take it back. There was a period of time around 1995, 1996, and frankly 1997, where a lot of people would not have been caught dead in neon. But the series is like, yeah, but we're still doing early 90s. And
we're still doing early 90s. We're calling it 97, but it's like it is that crunch. Like it is the comic book time dilation crunch, and it's also like it is like people unless you were there the 90s, like, you know, unless you've got historically accurate teenagers who are committed to the bit, which a shocking number of them are now. I know, it's like, oh yeah, it was the 90s. It happened in the 90s. They wear 90s clothes. The early 90s, late 90s, it's all the same 90s. It's the 90s.
Oh man, my coworker at Make the Road, who was like 21, this would have been like 2016, and she's wearing like the same Marilyn Manson t-shirt my brother had and a cross colors jacket, and I'm just like,
I freaking love it. It's off-putting. It's like I like the kind of uncanny effect that it has in my mind, like going like, you know, bouldering and or like, you know, just walking around like the boroughs, and you see like, you know, gaggles of I don't know, teenagers, early 20 something like that. And it's like, because of, you know, they've got Pinterest, they've got TikTok, they've got like social media. And I feel like there's much more enthusiasm about like the idea of recreating something in the past. Like vintage isn't a weird alternate thing. Like it is a move that you can just do because it's fun.
It's
and
so funny.
It's like it's folded into fashion now.
It's just so funny because I didn't wear 90s clothes in the 90s. I am terminally retro. I was retro in the 90s. I was retro in the aughts. I'm retro now. I can't help myself. So I'm like, I can't give you any of that because I didn't wear those things. But those are things my friends wore.
Yeah.
I was actually having the 60s back then because I'm a weirdo. But
no, and I feel like that's great. But it's like now I feel like now it's like, oh, wearing retro 60s clothing. Like the idea that like even taking the step towards wearing retro was already a beat off of the beaten path. So then you took 2 beats off the path. You're like in a different part of Candyland. Like, but like nowadays I feel like, and I think that's partly why like a show like this, like has like, you know, there was the momentum to do this, which it kind of honestly blows my mind that they made it. Like, I get it. It's 40 somethings like us. like it's nostalgia, it's parents, it's all of that stuff. Like Disney Plus now has like the original X-Men cartoons, so now they can fill it out. But like I do feel like there has been an absolute sea change in the past couple of decades about like the role of retro and about the role of the past. And like the fact that like, you know, it's good and it's bad. It's bad because like, you know, the old shall not die, so the new cannot be born. The good part is that it looks really cool and it's a fun game.
And as I said in the last episode, like, you know, Motendo, I think and I covered this extensively. We're not going to recycle it here, but like, you know, Motendo really does make a great statement about those things within the series.
Yes. You got to have a character like Mojo staring at the camera and just staying it flat. Like just, you see everyone. And it's like, I don't think that like totally washes it away, but it's like, well, at least they're aware of it. Just like the comic books were.
Yeah. They're telling you
commoditization.
One of our listener questions, which I'll just jump to here, actually, is they asked, what are some of the ways animators create body language mannerisms distinct per character in the modern age of simplified character design and more realistic body proportions, which has the combined effect of making characters less exaggerated and therefore potentially less expressive? To give an example, the original animated series character design was modeled after Jim Lee and had a large leg-torso ratios. Everyone was super leggy. The women in particular were leggy in a sexualized way. Meow. With their individual mannerisms that people might consider poor taste now, whereas 97 has a more realistic leg-torso proportions. Like everybody's hyper idealized, but people do come like that. That is a thing that exists.
It's true. I mean, Magneto has to be, he is the villain's villain. You know, so he has to be ultra beefcake. He has to be a head taller than everybody else, and he has to be like made of muscle. And it's like, sure, yeah, he can magnetically do something with blood in his muscles. Whatever, doesn't matter. He's got to be jacked. But yeah, no, it is definitely more realistic. And it's sort of like that squicky sort of thing of like, this show originally was my like coming of age show. So there's a part of me that's like, oh, it's less trashy now. That's too bad. Part of me also understands that it's probably better that it's like less trashy. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think it's less trashy. I mean, I just think that the quality of the animation is so much higher. Like people's faces are always in the right place. I like having the detail. Like
I don't know. And again, this is what did you say? We're too Bronze Age for this conversation between the two of us.
Yes.
Yes. I am not an animator. I have animator friends who I've spoken with this about. You should definitely get like a motion graphics or an animation person on your show to talk about stuff, because I feel like they'd have lots of cool things to say. I personally, just in terms of my own reading of the show, it's like I feel like it has lost some of the fluidity and expressiveness of the original show. Granted, the quality of the show could really vary depending, I'm sure, on like the studio. And you can tell which studio did what after you watch all of, earlier in the ongoing pandemic with some of my younger family. Like I did watch all of the X-Men and it's so funny that this dropped like maybe a month and a half after we finally wrapped it. So it was like a weird sort of like continuity that I did not see coming, and it's just coincidence. But
that was wild. I will take a graphics question that my intern asked, because you did give me a really good answer to when I sent it to you earlier. So I want to thank outgoing intern Sophia for their amazing work helping me on the podcast. They sent in the following question. Something that has consistently amazed me about the show has been the fight scenes and how easily you can follow them. My biggest gripe with superhero media is often there are too many things happening all at once on a dark screen. And I haven't experienced that at all while watching X-Men 97. Do you think this issue is an inevitable trade-off made with live action comics media, or if this is simply a brilliant feature of the show individually?
Yeah, I recall this. That was a real excellent question.
I had learned that different studios did the fight scenes versus the regular scenes.
And that totally makes sense, because that is a speciality. And my guess is, with the level of complexity and complication that happens with stuff like that, like it probably took about the same amount of time as the rest of the episode. Just because it really winds up just being like the amount of like props and the amount of assets and the amount of like flow through. I was very impressed with the show, and I guess this is getting back to the idea of like something is lost about fluidity when you switch over from cell animation to CGI. I feel like they found a good compromise with this show. I don't know if it's because I'm an artist, and I have like super face-o vision. I do find CGI faces off-putting, because I find that like I notice it. But I will say that like most people don't. and it's not really a high priority, especially people who don't watch a lot of cartoons. So I feel like while it is off-putting, like it is again, like it is a style, and you get used to it, and your brain starts compensating. I think it's too bad because I think the expressivity of cell animation or digital cell animation, what have you, like winds up being, and I've seen other versions of CGI that really sort of like spend an awful lot of time on expressivity specifically, like with faces, I mean. That said, I feel like the body expression for the characters was absolutely fantastic. And I think it does get back to that idea of like what we were talking about like a bit earlier about like that this show really centered characters over everything. So like when you wind up having action sequences like this that are so complex and so convoluted, it's because they've like stacked up an A, B, C, and D plot over an entire series, and they spaced it out well enough so that you're familiar with all of it. So when they keep changing beats, like you can follow the action because you're following plots that you've already been primed with. And then in each individual scene, they are painstakingly doing lots and lots and lots of work to make sure that the through lines of like action moving from character to character are following like proper cinema. Like, you know where characters are in space and who they're talking to and when, even when it goes absolutely bananas crazy with giant robots and like glowing lights and what have you. And then each individual character like winds up having like lots of attention to their body expressivity and their poses. So I guess like to a certain extent, like the fluidity is lost, but there was a crispness of line to everything that I think made a lot of the really busy action read crystal clear, even when like laser blasts are going off.
Thank you. That was totally perfect. I think about like just the way there were things that would happen in Dimension that you would not have seen in an earlier show that I just was electrified watching, especially with the way that Jean, Cable, and Scott fighting together. Actually, let's turn a little bit about the Jean, Cable, Scott family.
Summers family.
Yeah. It's so funny. I feel like a lot of the Madeline Pryor hardcore fans are upset that Gene is kind of like takes over as his mom despite his protestations. But I like that the show really has them kind of embrace each other. I really think so often things pit women against each other for no damn reason. And
no reason whatsoever.
It's neither of their faults that any of this shit happened, So I feel like one of the most memed things about the entire series that I've seen is the Scott and Cable familial father-son thing is memed to bejesus and back. And my theory about it is that there's something about seeing a man father like being nurturing to an even larger, more masculine, rugged man. That is so counter to what is fed to people as media in general, that it's like beautifully brain breaking. They like are like, yes, like, I mean, Scott Summers looks like he plays professional baseball or whatever, or soccer or something. Cable looks like he plays professional football. So I get that, like,
so good. And he's got the shoulder pads. Wow. I never put that together. So, like, brain blown.
I'm not here. I mean, I know that like Logan calls Scott slim. I'm not here claiming that Scott looks like a normal slender man.
Yes, but Wolverine is also built like a shot put, so he's like, it's very relative.
He's the shot putter and the shot put himself. But but the point being, like, I'm not saying that Scott is built like a normal person. He's not, but he is not jumbo sized in the way Cable is, and there's something about him being the father, and also Cable looks older than him. I don't know if chronologically Cable is or just more weathered because they don't have sunscreen in the distant future.
Right. But, or he just has white hair because white hair looks cool and it's cheaper to put in a comic book. Yeah.
Oh man. I think that that's part of what people like about it. I don't know. What's your theory about why everybody wants to meme Scott and Cable?
Right. I think that the idea of these two very, and let's be honest, very stoic characters, like almost aggressively stoic characters, like walled off, being emotional and tender with each other is like, I don't know. It is in its own way. It's like they are both people who are like, they are, I wouldn't call them, well, I'd call Scott a stick in the mud, but like deliberately so. It's hip to be square, and like his son is clearly a chip off the old block. They are both dealing with world ending, society wrecking, people destroying situations, and they have taken it as an opportunity to be as buttoned up as they possibly can be. And so for them to like open up to each other and like have these moments of tenderness, like exactly like you're saying with that size differential, I think that it's like, what did you call it? Brain breaking? It's wonderful. I think it's really great. I didn't see it coming. That's for sure.
Yeah, I never was super invested in Cable or their particular familial stuff. I enjoyed what the comics had. I take that back. In the Krakoan age, I actually did find it very sweet, but it wasn't as huge of a thing as this has been to me. I have found it so touching. And one of the things that really connects them with the Magneto storyline is you have Cable talking about in the future, searching to see himself reflected in the stories of his parents in the past, how upset he was that he wasn't part of the heroic stories of his parents in the past, and how sad he was that he couldn't see himself in their faces as he didn't get to see them or know them in those ways. And then when Magneto is having his crisis, Magneto is like, I can't remember my parents' faces. And then that's when, Xavier explains to him like about the fucking Holocaust because he's forgotten because he's in a brainwipe situation. And then the solution that is provided to him is like, well, we have queer family now. And that's what we have that fills in this missing piece. And you have that with Rogue and with Nightcrawler and their conversation as well. I mean, Rogue and Nightcrawler as siblings is something that gets talked about or not talked about depending on the time in the shows because, they weren't raised by the same people at the same time and like different countries. I mean, different environments and all that, but they still
very different environments, but
they've chosen to see each other and to see that the similarity. And I felt like the scene where Jean and Scott are saying goodbye to Nathan at the diner, also having it in the diner, right?
What a weird choice. Like the fact that he is like on this island and he is reproducing what I'm assuming is like, like Jersey.
Yeah, he's making his idolized New Jersey, like he's from like I think Bastian is from central Pennsylvania, I think, but it's still the diner belt. Yeah.
The diner belt, yeah.
The diner belt. The people who are in other countries. The diner belt is a section of America in which there are diners. But the fact that this conversation between Cable and his parents is happening in a diner, which is this like idealized American setting, but it's a fake one. And he's having this mental conversation with his parents. Like it was, I mean, I don't normally tear up about that kind of stuff. And I was there, especially when, it was
a real tearjerker situation.
It really was. And I was really impressed. I don't normally cry about that kind of a scene, but it got me. It really did.
I find it really interesting that they are sitting in a diner. It is like this thing that has been like created by somebody else to recapture a lost moment in time. And then they're the ones who get that recapture of a lost moment in time. It was like he set the stage for himself in this really sick, twisted way. And then they're the ones who are like, well, the set's here. We're going to have that family moment together. Like,
Ethan, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. And I want to bring back something here, in the conversation that Magneto and Xavier are having when in their mind castle. Xavier says, literally, the X-Men and I may not resemble each other, but we are still family. We had a dream, Charles, says Magneto as he slowly remembers, puts the pieces together, and Charles says, yes, a dream that made us a family. Any family worth having is worth fighting for. And it was such like a way to talk about a found family as a political structure, the way that it overwrites the desire, it by necessity will overwrite the desire for the sort of genetic similarity and sameness, which is interesting to me because this is a topic that if folks happen to watch Star Wars, The Bad Batch, Holly, when she was just on the show to talk about that last season of it, we had a real conversation about that and how that shows up in the Clone Wars and Star Wars and her own experience as an adopted person. Anyway, if that's a conversation
that's super interesting.
Star Wars, check out that episode. But this is definitely something the show cares a lot about, and like the fact that they can look different and still choose each other.
Yeah, and you do have that sort of like the idea of found family. I do appreciate that like the show really sort of continues to hammer home that theme. And again, everybody's 80s trash, favorite 80s trash, like Mr. Sinister showing up, who is obsessed with genetics. He wants to perfect. He wants to create the perfect species, like he wants to create the perfect individual. And like, Nate is that person. He is the ultimate thing. He wants him as a plaything because he can finally get his like harsh desire, which is like the ultimate genetic blah blah fill in the blank. Like, so he's obsessed with genetic purity. And then like he is done in by like this, you know, group of, you know, this basically disaster by bowling league shows up and like stomps his ass and in a bowling alley. Which is why it was on my mind, I guess. No, it's the idea of like at each and every turn, like this idea of this quest for purity, it has an upper hand for a moment, and then the found family like thwarts it. And I feel like that ultimately like is something that like, regardless of like the other political themes that like keep showing up, that is again like this deeply personal one that like lends itself to the political. And it stays very on point with it, which is really cool.
I even have another note that just says Nightcrawler explains queer family to Jean. I'm like it's just I don't know, all over the place. Not surprised that the show had past tense a queer showrunner. The moment where Bastian is taunting Cyclops, saying, "How does it feel to be abandoned by the future?" And then Cyclops is rescued by the future in the form of his son. It's like such a beautiful poetry. Such a beautiful poetry with them. And I was also really glad I didn't have to literally see Bastian beat him in the face with his own arm. I liked that they switched the angle on that, actually.
Yeah, you know, and when they ripped I definitely like the panel of Magneto like pulling the adamantium out of Wolverine on Asteroid M from the 90s. I remember reading that issue and it was seared into my mind. It was done with violence and gravitas. It was before the era of like violence for its own sake, or at least not in the X-Men comics at that point. So it was this really disgusting
in other comics
anatomically horrifying moment. Yeah, this disgusting anatomically horrifying moment, and it was played absolutely serious. And like they, you know, in this show, like, you know, they did, I think, a still frame of it, which is, you know, that's enough for the, you know, presumably the 12-year-olds, 40-year-olds that they want to have watch this together.
Yeah, it was brutal. I mean, my intern is an adult, but new to X-Men, like, messaged me immediately, like, "Is Wolverine dead? Please tell me that he's not dead." I actually had to like,
that's really cute.
Reassure them. I'm like, "No, it's okay."
His main run was in the original run of the show, and like he is now playing more of a side character, which I thought was really interesting. You know, he is, because he is like he has made his peace with whatever's going on to a certain extent. I always think it's really interesting because like his main dynamic as part of X-Men from, I can't remember which specific years, but definitely in the cartoon show, was that he was Jubilee's protector. Like he is the guy who is like going to chaperone her and like bail her out when she's in trouble, like scold her, like keep her both in line and safe at all times. And so like now that she's like, you know, there was that really great moment in the Mojo episode where Sunspot like falls on the ground and she does a perfectly executed superhero landing because she has logged thousands of missions and hours in like danger room at this point. So it's sort of like the difference between how she started the show and how she is now. Like she doesn't need she needs Wolverine because they love each other, but like she doesn't need him as a protector anymore. So it's like in that way, like his role sort of like being diminished a little bit as sort of like the center of the show is moved. And I think that was the right call.
The voice actor voice is so good on this. I mean, it's the same guy. He sounds so old, and I love it.
He does.
I mean, Wolverine's 100 years old, so why not?
And it's like he was an older person, I believe, when the original show was made, and so then him sounding even older now. I mean, I am in your camp. I agree with it. I think also it's like, I think some grace has to be given for voice actors who are stepping into roles that they haven't played in 30 years. Some of them have done other acting. New people are coming into it. And I do feel like, I don't know what the episode recording, like, I don't know if they did it episodically, but it does feel like by the end of the season, a lot of them who I feel like, I wouldn't say struggled, but like there was some like gap in the original one to the second one. I feel like it all kind of got back by the end of the season. You know, that could just again maybe getting used to their more mature voices now, or it could be the fact that like they were getting back to it. This is all blatant speculation on my part. But like that's the wonderful thing about voice acting, is that they can step into roles that they played before and play the exact same characters like 2 weeks had passed. I feel like what is the name
Masterful.
of the actor who played Storm?
The actress is Allison Seeley Smith.
I mean, has to read the most absolute self-serious lines in the entire series, and like crushes every single one. Like that dialogue is absurd,
it's so hard.
and she makes it sound like it is actually coming from the most regal, Storm whisperer in the world. I will say also, in terms of like the conversation we were having a little bit earlier about animation, not only like can some of the effects get better and crisper, but this was a real opportunity. They truly showed how powerful like Storm is as a character. They were able to show like the entire cyclonic system that she was conjuring up on like a large scale, as opposed to suddenly there's a shot of the sky and some rain is falling or there's a big cloud. Like you can really kind of get the sense of like who she is, and like not to be the kind of person who's talking about power sets, because I feel like it's slowly killing fandom, but it is nice to see that like they are, that sort of very important information about her from the comic books is like being relayed in the show in a way that I feel like fits the environment and the scenes and adds really cool set pieces and stuff.
Oh, I love that the actor who's playing Gambit, by the way, is fully committed to the bit IRL and was like wearing Gambit's like crop top cut off shirt to one of the panels.
Freaking love it.
God bless. Speaking of voice actors, Gates McFadden as Mother Ascani.
I did not know that. Holy moly. That's
what
really
a
great.
Wonderful thing.
That's really good.
I know. I don't want to jump to the end and talk about what's next quite yet, but I assure listeners we'll be doing that. We're getting.
So wait, does that if Gates McFadden is doing, does that mean that we're going to get Brent Spiner and Marin Sirtis and like the rest of the crew to show up? Because every time one of them works on a cartoon show, the rest of the PG start showing up.
I mean, we saw the faces and heard nothing of the voices from, Rachel Gray, Psylocke. There's so many. Banshee. You could have call Meanie from Star Trek come in and be Banshee. Like there's so many characters we could get Star Trek actors on to do the voices for. Who would you have Martina Sirtis be from the X-Men? Who hasn't been voiced yet?
I don't know. You're going to have to get back to me about that one, because my brain just had a cascade failure trying to think about it.
Okay. But now I'm really into thinking about this.
Yeah.
Okay.
My one, I do lament, I believe, did Lauren Kennedy pass away? I feel like, I'm trying to remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was Apocalypse, my all-time favorite childhood villain voice actor.
Oh, yeah.
Also, he was the presence in Star Trek for a long time.
No, we have someone playing Ensaba Nur,
which is fantastic.
African, and I love it.
I believe I'm really excited for that. I think that their future episodes were they from a graphic novel or were they from a run of the comics? I vaguely remember reading them in a Borders Books and Music some long ago decade, and it was very painfully. That when they land in the future, and the past, like when they start breaking
they have the set. Yeah, there totally looks like they're going to be hitting up like this, the Cyclops and Jean, and the Cyclops and Phoenix, like miniseries where they get to raise Nathan in the future.
Yeah. What an interesting and weird piece of source material to draw from. I really hope that they do, because that gets into like, that's like Marvel's like super future Jack Kirby weirdness period, where they get to like make up words about a future society and then stick to them.
Yeah, it's true, and like commit to the bit, as it were.
Commit to the bit. This is a show that is always committed to committing to the bit, and I'm glad they didn't. It's like, I don't know. I understand why children's media has changed so much, but it's like at some point, like you got to put the winking and the nodding down, and you got to do some drama. And this show has always been about the drama and all, like the romance and like the political subtext, and it takes itself very seriously. And honestly, when the show ended, I was sort of sad that sort of era like came to a close. That nothing else took itself that freaking seriously in the children's entertainment space.
One of the great pieces of animation, and I don't actually, it's not even animation, it's just visual storytelling that from this one, was the first episode where you see Charles back on Earth and he wakes up alone in the bed. You see he puts his arm out because he's expecting Lilandra to be there, and he's not. And then he has to go and physically move his legs with his arms, and and how like alone and sad he is. Like they knowing to create those quiet moments and to like yeah, like animate that and not just the fighting, I think.
Yeah, animate stillness. It's like, yes, it is, because it is still media and it still follows the precepts of cinematography and meaning making in visual narrative. And yeah, I guess I hadn't even thought about that because I was so used to seeing it, having, just recently watched a whole bunch of it. It's
but
something
yeah, he
I
has
feel
a
like
loss in it because he's like, oh yeah, my wife,
yeah.
not my white knife. I'm like alone now. I'm not with her.
Oh, my bird wife. Where's my bird wife? Everything sucks. I've lost my magnetic boyfriend. I've lost my bird wife. Everything is terrible.
You gotta get back together with your magnetic boyfriend. We're so close. Oh my God. Like they just, we cracked me out. You messaged me when you were watching the show, basically saying like your partner was like being like, when are they going to kiss? Which I just loved that. She hasn't seen any of these things. Like, and she's still just like, this is just
very
like obvious.
It's very obvious. And it's also it's a sizzling moment. And on top of that, it's sort of like, my answer was like, oh, probably never. But I did like a T-Perry's answer, which is like, we all saw it, right? We all saw the same thing, right? They smooched, right? Great. Okay, cool. End of story.
Yeah. Past and hopefully future guest T. Fogner had write in as their question. So how many times did Magneto and Charles kiss? And yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
It's hard.
Mean, like literally, he's like, Rogue abandoned me. You abandoned me. And with like, Professor X is responding like, the only ones who could break our hearts are the ones kept in it. I'll always have you, even if I'm pulled under two. Look, it's as much as I might love the love hexagon at the center of the series, nobody in the Charles, Maddie, Scott, Jean, Logan, the outer forces of space that is calling to the Phoenix and Morph hexagon are saying that to each other.
Right. Those are two adults who have lived a tremendous amount of life through its ups and downs. And still see each other in each other's eyes. Come on, you guys, writers, give us a break here. Yeah. It's not their fault. It's corporate. I guess
especially because so many writers are queer. It is corporate. Yeah.
And it sucks because it's like, you're just like, oh, I'm so happy for the scraps that they threw us. Yay. And I genuinely am.
I know. It's the thing. Somebody was asking, well, how come you don't feel this way about a show that we haven't covered on the podcast, which is the Harley and Ivy animated series?
Oh, yeah.
Is very much a queer protagonists animated superhero show, which I do watch and enjoy. But I don't have the same emotional pull to it that I've experienced with this show. And I'm not against covering the Harley and Ivy, but there is a certain amount of look what we can get away with that kind of feels like a little played out. I don't know. I mean, but I'm glad the other show exists. I do enjoy it. I'm not against covering it, but it just hasn't had the same emotional pull for me. But I do feel like a bit hypocritical, like spending 3 episodes talking about X-Men 97 and nothing talking about actual show with queer main characters, Harley and Ivy.
Right. I suppose part of it is also like, I mean, this gets into excuse me if I'm wrong. One of the complications of doing a queer reading, where like part of the advantage and disadvantage of it is that sometimes like characters who are written queer, and you're just like, that doesn't actually like ring accurately. And then 2 characters who fucking hate each other with a blinding, smoldering passion. And you're like, nope, that's the romance right there. And they are not romantic at all, but they absolutely are. It's sort of like, you're trying to get it, like part of like doing the queer reading of something is like trying to get at the emotional heart of a matter. So it's like, sometimes it's sort of like being used to it because again, you're just sort of like trying to work with what you get. But then sometimes it's like, oh man, this other thing really reads a lot truer, even though that wasn't the intent, or it has to be heavily sublimated for X, Y, or Z reasons, whether, corporate audience or time period. I don't think there's a right answer to it. I think it's just the way that it is.
Yeah. And I will say this also for members of the Love Hexagon growing up. Scott, like acknowledging when like Logan is like passed out and adamantiumless, Don't you dare break her heart. Do what you do best. Heal. Which again, a reminder that that is actually what Logan's superpower is. Like people
Right.
think about his superpower is the knife hands and the being super strong and this and that. It's like his actual superpower is healing. Everything else was done to him because, I mean, yes, we find out later that they are bone claws, but we know that that wasn't really the intent from the beginning.
It's true. It's going to blow everybody's mind in a couple of years. It's really great.
But
I think,
yeah.
I actually had a thought, like in addition to like the touching nature of Scott, with Scott and Cable, I think part of it is also like, for people who grew up watching the show, they never ever insinuated in the original run that they were related. So some people just got something who didn't read comics that just absolutely blew their minds. Like,
that's wild.
They like it completely recontextualizes characters that they remember from their childhood, maybe fondly or maybe dimly, but like it just was never said. That's like in the comic books we had to wait like, I don't know, like 10 years or something. Somebody told me about it after the fact because I didn't read those issues. But like here, it's like they had to wait like 20 something years to be told something that is actually really important. So I do wonder if, like, in addition, I feel like there is the tenderness of it. Then there's also just the sheer, just like, I'm sorry, wait, he's whose son? And what? They must love each other very much. He keeps trying hundreds of times to go save his mother. That's really cool.
Yeah. Good performance from that voice actor too, actually, when Sinister like makes him say it. I'm going to take a quick look at who that was.
200 times.
Chris Potter. Chris Potter, who was the original Gambit, he's doing Cable's voice now. Lawrence Bain was the original Cable's voice.
Oh. I very much appreciate it. I'm guessing it's Kevin Feige, like, or I think somebody told me, or like they read about it, like the fact that they like insisted on bringing back the voice actors who were available. Like, I don't know. I think it's really great. It shows like a little bit of like, I'm sure it's also like there was some ruthlessness involved in the idea, but like beyond that, like showing some level of understanding that like that sort of continuity can be very important, and it's really important to like bring in the people who helped make it in the first place, and there is I really need to track it down. There is a book about the making of the cartoon show and the ups and downs of it, and it was like, in order to cast it the way they wanted to cast it, and in order to do it without the level of interference to get like their vision of the project done, like they brought in like, people with theatrical chops, and they did their very, very best to do it and revise it until it got to a level of quality that they thought was really going to be something special. And I don't know, just acknowledging that past work is pretty cool.
Yeah. So let's talk about the very, very end. We have the X-Men lost in time. We mentioned the Cyclops and Jean piece of that. And we have other X-Men flying back to the distant past with En Savannah and the early days. I like the parallel of, in the earlier series, you have Forge and Bishop constantly dealing with the time travel plots. And now you have them kind of in the reverse, where Bishop's like, hey, time travel stuff, you're going to have to help with that, showing up with Forge. How do you feel about where they left the show for the season break?
I felt like they had just done all of this intensely cool stuff. Like they stuck the landing with like, something that had been stitched together for multiple runs of comic over multiple decades after like a very, very long hiatus for a show. They actually pulled it off. And then they had to pull a Doctor Who where suddenly it's like, okay, off to the races, the next thing. It's part of it is like exciting and part of it is also exhausting. I think that's just the nature of episodic television, especially if it's serialized. But I think it's exciting because it is like new stuff, and it's stuff I think that'll be fun to visit. It's these questions of like, what is a mutant, and like, where did all of this like happen, and where did it all go wrong? But at the same time, like, it would have been nice, I think, to have like stuck a little bit more with some of the political fallout of what happened. But that might not just be in the brief of like what is required of this show. That's my general sort of note with like entertainment in general. It's just like, you came up with this really awesome idea and you did this really cool thing and you did all of this world building, and like now the world is like changed, and like what's changed, what's the same, and then you wind up not sticking with it because it's off to the races. I think that is, again, just the nature of the medium.
One of a questions from a listener was, would the season have benefit from twice the episode count with the same amount of plot?
Interesting. I don't think so. I think it could have done with one extra episode or splicing the last episode into two. That being said, because I did feel like at certain moments it was a little overstuffed. I really do feel like they kept the whole thing tight, and it was like, you know, when there were silent moments, they were silent. When there was a dramatic moment, they took the beat and they let the scene happen. You know, I think that some of the stuff felt like really dizzying. But again, it's just like, you know, episode to episode, everything changes. And I'm glad that they released it on a weekly schedule. I think that the show was an appropriate length of time. I don't think, and I don't really go for like the whole fan idea of like that there's filler episodes or beach episodes and not filler episodes. Like, I don't think that that's a thing. I think that sometimes things connect into like a larger drama or plot, and sometimes things are their own contained episode. Sometimes those episodes have larger ramifications, and sometimes they're a thing that is like a character poem or a character tone. So I feel like additional episodes would have been rad, because then we would have seen more rad stuff happen. But I feel like with the way that the plot like played out, I feel like they took an appropriate amount of time for it. That's my opinion. What do you think?
I mean, it's just a big difference between how shows are made now and then, and the number of episodes. You know, the show really was relentless in its pacing, and I do agree with you that maybe pulling out this last bit might have been a bit better. But I cannot imagine any reality where we would have gotten double the amount of episodes, and they still will have had money to spend to make shit look good. It's just the sad reality. But you're right; it was everything. But dear listener, you're correct that everything was ridiculously compressed, which makes the achievement of the series all the more shocking, to be honest.
It is, and I do feel like, you know, in the original run of the cartoon, the pace was slower because the pace of everything was slower back then, which was both good and bad. Mostly, I think good, because then you were able to get like scenes of like them going out shopping, hanging out with each other, and trading barbs. And I feel like some of that stuff happened here, but like when it has to wind up being very plot heavy, I think it's to the show's credit that they ended up like focusing very much on character development and work, as opposed to just plot. But it is nice sometimes to have some digressions and some shaggy dogs thrown in there, maybe some space lizards about your ex-boyfriend.
I think it's very clear from the Apocalypse appearance in the post-credit sequence that we'll be getting Gambit as one of the four horsemen of the Apocalypse in the next.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. That's a cool idea.
I mean, well, that's why you have Apocalypse is like looking at the cards and being like, there is so much death, and he's holding the death card. So like, yeah, okay, they're doing another round of Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Definitely will have Gambit as one of them. Curious who else they may have. If maybe it'll be, you know, have Banshee or some. I mean, so many people were killed on Genosha, like they really could be drawing almost anybody. And I guess this is the way we're going to get. It's how we're going to get four characters back at least. So
bring them. They're going to have to do like a fan poll or something. Yeah, no, I'm curious about that. It's like, yeah, I feel like we could have spent the entire episode solely talking about Genosha.
Well, that's because we covered that already. How about this? I will assume that our listeners have listened to me talk about Genosha in episode.
That's 2. Fair. I don't know. Yeah. And having listened to that, I think I mostly meant that like I could talk about it for hours.
I would like, you know, but I was going to say I'm game to hearing your thoughts on
the unfortunate timing of starting something years in advance and then having a show about you know, a mutant Jew who has been prosecuted, who is then lashing out at the world. But then also in the face of a genocide, you know, with the complexities of like a Jewish ethno state in a foreign part of the world actively committing a genocide simultaneously. What a real messy, deepening reading of a kid's cartoon show.
I mean, it's also like the piece that's always missing is like there's really not a parallel in the sense that Genosha was a place that was oppressing mutants, like, right? And now mutants are like, I mean, it was a South Africa metaphor basically for like,
right.
Folks, like that's what it was doing. So that's really different.
It's like if giant robots took out South Africa instead of the petro state. Yeah, no, it's there. The metaphor, like these metaphors become very kludgy. And then also like in the face of actual like current genocide, like it becomes really real to see a cartoon depiction of something like that, and then having characters make like very valid points about the state of their minds in the face of it. And then people making those same statements, like, have the power of the state brought out of them, and then they get arrested at their own college. Yeah, not ideal. So X-Men, I feel like, is doing more heavy lifting in terms of its relevancy than it should have to. Let's put it that way.
One of the things that Sarah and I spoke about were all the ways that, like, there are previous precedences for all of these pieces that they are drawing from.
Yeah.
Which is, like, unfortunate. It's unfortunate that yes, that this keeps happening. It's unfortunate that this is not as unique a situation as people might think.
And they even draw the dialogue in the show actually talks about that, where she's like that nobody was terribly surprised. Like, you know, when she's talking about, like,
look, that nobody was terribly surprised.
I mean, my God, how freaking dark. Like, you know, my biggest problem with Grant Morrison's run of the original Genosha story is I felt like the aftermath was handled very well. I feel like the actual thing happened in a single issue, and then, like, it was done for story reasons. It's like, genocide, that's really awful, and everybody's traumatized for it, and then the trauma never goes away. But that it happens so suddenly and so randomly that it's done to, like, emphasize how villainous Cassandra Nova is.
Cassandra Nova is a villain from the X-Men comics that we have not seen on the show, for folks who don't know what we're talking about. And she causes the genocide in Genosha in the comics series, New X-Men. I mean, what I focused on in this episode was how important it was that we got to see Genosha thriving before it was destroyed, which is the piece that we missed in the comics. The comics didn't give us.
100%.
Essential for humanizing the victims is showing that it was thriving before. One of the things that the creators said they really had in mind, they also were thinking about the Pulse shooting, which connects back to, like, the fact that Jubilee has the coming out conversation with Roberto while they're doing the recovery cleanup work together. And she's like, I haven't spoken to my parents in ages, but they called me to ask if I thought there was going to be a mutant human war, you know, and she basically says, like, she wouldn't want her parents burying a stranger. Like, the fact that this need to come out and, like, be honest about who you are to your family is in the context of mortality is, like, really heavy coming in a conversation around the Pulse shootings.
That's really interesting context for it. I feel like, again, doing a lot of heavy lifting for a kid's show. Real stuff. I feel like what they're doing, or what they're attempting to do, is take children's entertainment seriously, proportionally to where children are at now, the same way the original show took children seriously where children were at then.
And your young family member who's been really into watching the show is a teenager, right? So it's not like it's for kids.
Perfect.
It's it's not like kids.
No, but it's not kids. Yeah.
Do you have anything that you want to hit up that we haven't hit up yet?
When you asked me about, like, you know, Bastian, like, my original, like, sort of brain was just like, cyborgs, robots are so cool. And then they also, like, made him super cut, and Jonty gave him, like, a surprisingly tasteful purple and black outfit. Like, I don't know. It's a hot character. It's, you know, a character who's clearly enjoying himself being a villain. I feel like what's so great about a villain like that is that, like, when they start getting serious and going off of the rails, it's a significant difference from them being campy and enjoying themselves. Like, it's when they stop being funny and self-amused, they start becoming really lashing out and dangerous. And the X-Men are really good at pissing people off like that. And I thought that was a very good job. I think that, like, character-wise, that he becomes increasingly more and more roboticized, more of a robot towards the end of it, as he keeps absorbing more and more things. Like, they make an overture of humanity to him when, like, all his humanity in terms of, like, his actual character design is almost lost. And I think that's super cool, because at that point, like, he is turning into the machine of extermination of oppression. Like, it is as literal as a metaphor ever gets. And having a character design that, like, encompasses that. And I do also think that, I'm trying to remember, this is, like, such deep, like, visual brain research. When he steals Cable's arm, and it's just like, oh shit, he's got 50th century tech, like, now. So he instantly turns himself into, like, a spaceship and, like, goes off to kick their ass. The wings that he develops on his body were, like, reminiscent also of the wings of Archangel. And they were also, and this might also be, however, does a super go there in the future, but one never knows. They're also the wingy things that Onslaught has in the 2000s. So it
a number
might
of people were wondering about that. Yeah,
I think it could be a little bit Onslaught-y, especially since he didn't put Magneto into a coma. I feel like what they cooked up was much more meaningful and touching.
Yes, much more.
Their minds did touch, and so the bad juju might come around.
That's true. They could because they could have their love child that's a hate child. I hope that if they do have a love child and it's not a hate child.
I hope that if they have a hate child, that hate child is loved. But maybe don't turn him into
fathers.
Yeah, maybe don't turn him into Onslaught. Because then Onslaught also destroys New York City, and then it was really bad to have that in the odds also. Like, too soon, everybody. You always destroy Manhattan, but maybe for this particular year, don't destroy Manhattan. And then they destroyed Manhattan. Yeah. Art. So they've got lots of options, is what we're hearing.
So folks might know that the original plan for the Graphic Policy Radio coverage of X-Men 97 was I was going to be covering it with my frequent co-host and close friend, Stephen Atwell. And Stephen died in early April. And I'm so grateful that he and I got to record an episode about the first 2 episodes of the series at that point. And as grateful as I am that we were able to do it, and God knows, I'm so glad we got to hear his brilliant words about a show that he was ecstatic and excited about. I'm haunted as I watch the series, thinking about like, what are the things I would most want to ask him if we were watching it together now? And while we can't get any answers, although I do suggest folks go to and look his amazing essays, especially all the writing he did about X-Men. If you want to check out A People's History of the Marvel Universe at Graphic Policy, and look up the X-Men focused columns of that, you will learn a great deal about the comics and as well as world and American history and how they piece together. But while we can't ask him directly, I thought, since you're both friends with Stephen, what is a question that you would have asked Stephen if you were hosting the podcast and he was able to join us?
Oh, gosh. One should ask Stephen everything because Stephen knows everything.
This is also true.
Sucks. What a jerk.
Every time I saw Cap on screen, I was like, okay. Like I said, I think Stephen would understand why Cap has to be the heel here, but I would still love to hear his take. I also would have been curious to hear his analysis of the Wakandan standpoint. One of the things that we see clearly in the series is how every time human governments have the opportunity to make a bad decision, they do, right? They decide that it's too politically risky to help Genosha. It's too politically risky to help refugees from Genosha relocate. There's a giant hovering ball of asteroid M in the sky. Surely just firing rockets at it couldn't possibly have any negative consequences on those of us who live down below it, etc. The humans just never miss an opportunity to do something remarkably short-sighted, destructive. And I would have loved to hear him talk about, it seems like King T'Chaka, the father of Black Panther, has a different take on things than the other world leaders. And I would have loved to hear Stephen elaborate some more on that for sure.
I think that the small little moments of other political leaders that show up when Dr. Doom appears on the screen with Mr. Sinister and they're having this bizarre bloodless conversation. I thought that politically it's interesting that they were queuing up. I mean, it could have not been queuing up. It could have just been for fun. Having characters who are supposed to be above and beyond the politics and morality of the world, even them being disgusted with what they're doing. I would have loved to have asked what his take on the line where she says, Bastian's own Mangala. And Mr. Sinister replies back in that bizarre voice, I know Mangala. And he's, it's trying to, I could be he's these petty idiot Nazis with their stupid, awful ideas. Not like me, the genetic supremacist super scientist. It's these really interesting, awkward political moments, which are done for effect in comics and in the things, and it's effective. But I would love to hear what he thought about in the insertion of those kinds of lines like he has in Doctor Doom in something like this.
Yeah, that was an interesting, and Zemo being there, the meaning of Zemo.
Zemo with his purple ski mask of evil.
And I would love to know what he thought about what we got from Nightcrawler. You and I haven't talked about Nightcrawler much here. I know that Stephen was so excited about the preview image that we'd gotten of Nightcrawler with 3 swords, thereby living his best life, fully swashbuckling with every appendage with which he may swashbuckle. And I know Stephen was really excited to be able to see that. And this series animated the fuck out of that sequence.
Mm-hmm. Where his swords just fall down onto the carpet and he's like, oh crap, my swords, I can do this.
Well, the scene where you see Nightcrawler pull Logan and there's a Omega Sentinel between them and pull them, teleporting him away, was one of the best animated moments in the series. And I know he would have loved to see that.
The moment where he's teleporting them all to the rooftop, and then you see the teleportation from Logan's perspective, like we're seeing what it looks like.
Yes.
The inside the teleport tube. Yeah,
oh
so good. With the stretching of the limbs and the distorted perspective and the gibbet.
That was amazing animation, and he would have loved that. Yeah. Thank you for joining me for that. And I know, some listeners might not be as familiar with Stephen, although, we hosted the Venture Brothers podcast together, and he was always my guest to talk about anything Captain America related. And also we talked about X-Men, Marvel history, comics, all kinds of things over the years. So I do think Book Graphic Policy listeners are familiar with him, but I appreciate folks joining me, remembering his work and his tremendous legacy that you can still read online for free to check out Race to the Iron Throne, as well as A People's History of the Marvel Universe. So tell our listeners, how can they keep up with your work? Where can they keep up with Sometimes Kingdom and check out other cool projects you're working on?
Yeah, you can check out the game stuff that I'm working on right now by going to the stillfleet.com and Stillfleet's Discord. You can also follow Stillfleet at Stillfleet on social media, especially Instagram and Twitter. You can follow
spell that
me
for everyone?
Sure.
To make sure they can.
It is Stillfleet. It is still as in stop and fleet as in fleet. Stillfleet.com or Stillfleet on social media. I can be reached, and you can also see all the different kinds of artwork that I do, in addition to game art, at Spectral House, which is my handle across all things, wherever fine internets are sold.
Spectral House? I will always make a ghost house.
Spectral House. My card has a ghost house on it. It's Kaleidoscope 60s. You'd love it. I'll send it to you.
I love it. Thank you again so much for coming on. And
my pleasure.
I've been really excited. I've been so excited about the game work that you're doing. I know that I'm going to be doing some play testing for the Sometimes Kingdom.
Yes.
And I've really enjoyed the Stillfleet game that we were in together. The only pre-rolled character I've ever been enthusiastic about was getting to play a 7-foot-tall giant disgusting cricket in your game who's a diplomat. And
excellent. And wooing an electronic alarm system on the planet Yugoth, as I recall.
Yeah. I got to date a plinth that zaps the unwary, to quote
Plinthy
planetary.
I think is what Jared called it. Yeah.
Yes.
One last thing. Every other Monday at 7 on twitch.tv /Stillfleet, we are going to be doing live gaming with our cast of talented actors as we actively playtest The Sometimes Kingdom, a retro fantasy game. We are also going to be releasing edited versions of those as episodes on a TBD site as podcast episodes. So I'll keep you posted of that as well.
Can you define, what do you mean by retro fantasy? Like, I want to make it, because I feel like that could sound like we're talking about like 70s retro or like,
exactly.
What is that?
Retro fantasy is a marketing term that I cooked up that is extremely ambiguous, solely to conjure up a vibe. The time period of the actual game itself is ambiguous. It takes place sometime in the 20th century. Really, the only parameter of it is that it does not take place now. It takes place in the sister world of Earth, the realm of Seasons Keep, a place where the seasons are places and the dead don't always die, where fantastical magic is so absurdly commonplace that the Questing Network is a nonprofit that is not very well run, sending would-be adventurers on quests for the public good, solving problems from spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I
love it. I think that's a great teaser for folks.
Yay!
And for me, I continue to be easy to reach on Blue Sky, LEVIN. and which now has direct messages. So now you have no reason.
They've got direct messages. Well,
We
then you
just
can also
started
find
DMs.
you can find me on Spectral House at on Blue Sky as well, because I'll be moving there immediately.
Yeah, they just opened the DMs.
While we were talking, I was drawing a Disaster by robot with their tank of Disaster by robot energy. I will send it to you. To do
I
what
was
you will with it.
drawing Rogue. Send me the Disaster by robot, and I'll show you Rogue. Okay. I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much, Ethan.
Take care.
So thank you guys for listening to the show, and I appreciate folks being game to join us, and it's really meaned a lot to have everybody's support during what's been a really difficult time. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.